I'm now recording. Well, great. Thanks everybody for joining us today. The link to the agenda is in the notes here on the side and in the invite, I think. And you may notice we decided to sort of keep the running notes out of the agenda. This is just for the current meeting, and we throw it up onto the ROS wiki, so it's sort of in an easy to find place. So with that, we also are going to do these meetings one time in the afternoon like this for us, and one time earlier in the day so we can get people no matter what time zone they're in. So hopefully that'll work for everybody. So I think I've got everybody for attendance. I'll check back later. So the first thing we were going to talk about was from Sid, who's a security robotics person here at Canonical, but he unfortunately had to head out right now.
I'll take that one, though. I still think it's worth talking about, if that's all right.
Oh, yeah. Gonna go for it. I'll let you take it. Great.
All right. So we've been talking to eProsima about adding a logging plugin to FastRTBS. And I mentioned this briefly in the Matrix room as well. The goal, what we're trying to enable is getting data back into a SIM, and actually being able to monitor security events on a robot, and also extract security events for other purposes like training, rough and right. We talked about that, and so we've been looking at what we need to get things into tools like Splunk or Nagios, etc. And we've come up with a number of questions that we wanted to present to the group. The big one is, if you're using ROS too, obviously, and security events are being exported using the DDS security spec, what you actually end up seeing are things that are happening at the DDS level, which we're concerned. Obviously, things get mangled and services and actions look different, right? How do we make sure that what people actually see in the log makes sense from a ROS perspective? And I know that we've dealt with mangling a lot in, turning the XML policies into permissions files and that type of thing. Have we ever had to deal with going backwards? Anybody?
So when we were scraping the Discovery DDS traffic to auto-generate the precise DDS permissions, or at least the ROS policies, that then we went up and down and up again. But that was an example where we have I have a pull request, I think that's in the draft, of adding the script to convert RTI SQLite recording of Discovery traffic and generate the ROS abstractions of the policy. But that had to do the demangling, and that was all using XML templates. But there's an example there of how to demangle.
Okay, so do you agree that it would make sense for such a tool to use, or rather, for such a logging tool to use the demangling stuff that you're talking about? I mean, do you agree that it really doesn't make a lot of sense outside of that?
I would have to ask what additional aspects do you want to start logging aside from DDS wire event? Like you tried to attempt a handshake and it was failed because the SSL certificate, or the X509 certificate was signed with something else. What other higher level things are you thinking of monitoring?
Well, right now that's an example of the type of thing we're talking about, right? I mean, different DDS implementations may or may not log those, and do so in different ways, because RTI is the only one that actually has a logging plugin that puts things over DDS topic, right?
Or I could see a use case too where you'd have, besides just the handshake didn't work, things like, okay, well, a box has been compromised and it's sending bad data and it can't understand it because someone's trying to use that as a vector for a DDoS against another robot, right? So that's sort of what we're thinking about.
That would be higher level, I suppose. Yeah. But the low level stuff, I mean, just at the topic level, right? If we don't do demangling, does
So
it
I
still
think
make sense to do, I guess? Go ahead, Mikhail.
yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to try to make it like more like ROS friendly, ROS user friendly, that so for DTS focused. We dealt with that in a couple of places, as Griffin mentioned, when we were like working on interpreting discovery data. There is also a set of C++ functions. I posted a link to one of these files. All the RMW implementations already provide C++ functions to actually demangle names, because they may be mangled differently in different DDS implementations. So we could like
Oh, that's
leverage
good to
that.
know. Wait. So I
Because
was doing my best to start taking notes. Can you say again where those were?
oh yeah, sorry. So I sent one on the chat of this meeting in like RMW Faster TPS shared. There is one, and I assume that Connex shared would have another one.
So each
Basically,
implementation
each
has their own, is what you're saying.
yeah, and I think now they must be mostly like converging. But at the beginning, at least for OpenSplice, it was different.
Is that part of the
So each
RMW
of them,
API, or are they all sort of their own private things?
I think no, I think they're more like private things. I
Okay.
don't know how I don't think they're exported, but we could like make a case for them to be exported and part of the RMW API if we can show that tools actually require it.
Yeah. Well,
We didn't
it
leverage.
might make
So
sense, huh?
yeah, in the case of what we were doing with Ruffin on the security side, because we wanted it to be embedded in the template logic, we actually re-implemented them in XSL. But it's not necessarily a good idea to keep going the re-implementing route if we actually want to have something that's like at the level of RCL or MW. And so in
Well,
that
and
case, we
how do you
moved
deal with
over
the
to
fact
Ruffin.
that each implementation does it slightly differently? Are we only focusing on faster TVS right now, or
Yeah, so that's where I had like a couple questions on the approach, just to know if first if your idea is only for logging security events or if you are talking about like logging events in general, and then how do you envision that in a sense that like if if we need to change how implementations actually do logging, that means basically it assumes that we have enough power as ROS2 security people to push changes to all these DDS implementations, which may be tricky.
you're absolutely right. Yeah, that may not be a winning battle. Oh, sorry. We did
Oh
talk to
no,
eProcessment, and they're up for it.
You're cutting in and out.
It's because I keep getting
sorry.
muted.
So
Mikhail, go ahead.
sorry, I thought I was muting myself. Maybe I'm muting you. I
Yeah,
don't
you
have
keep
that
muting
power.
me.
I don't know.
I
I'm so sorry about that.
was like, oh, maybe I'm interrupting him. I'm sorry.
Because no, and I was still like, oh, how is my mic still on? We're gonna have echo. I need to fix it. Okay, that makes sense now. Sorry, it's a bit late here, so I'm not
No
at
problem
the
at all.
speed.
I appreciate you being here, by the way. I know it is late there. What was
Um,
I
yeah, so
saying?
I think like overall, like if we can get buy-in from people, like different vendors, that's really awesome. Uh, my only point, like what I wanted to bring up is like it may be tricky for some of them, and so relying on like that's part of why the RMW implementation doesn't try to deal with logging, with like DDS logging itself, and tries to just deal with like whatever error codes they return, or just like pass along the message they actually throw. Um, because I can imagine many reasons for many companies to not allow us to say, hey, you should do logging in your software that way. Um, so I think it may be a tricky battle to win. I don't know if I have a great alternative to offer, though. So it's easy to just point out that potential issues.
No,
But yeah, so I don't know
it's an
what would be
excellent
on the
point,
RCL side.
and we haven't talked to anyone else either. It's really mostly I guess it's more of a proof of concept right now. Seeing if the different vendors are interested, and this one was at least. And then also seeing what sort of tools we can enable with it. And then we can potentially take what we've made to other DDS vendors saying, people are using this. This is useful. Is it something that you would be interested in supporting as well? And just see how that goes.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great initiative. And one thing that I would be interested in, I don't know if any of us on that call has access to any of the OMG resources. But one thing that would be good to know is if there is any change upcoming, because they've been talking about the next DDS security version for a very long time. And so I guess Hiroshima would know, or at least RTI would know for sure, if there is any plan or if we can push any like global agenda in the logging plugin description so that if it actually makes it to the next rev of the spec or the next version of the spec, then it's much easier to actually like get people to buy in. And then if they actually said, oh, we settled on something else, if we could be aware of that before the spec comes out, that makes the work easier on our side. I'm not a member of OMG, so I don't have access to that. But if anyone
Who?
is, that would
Yeah,
be useful.
we're not either. Do we know? Are all the DDS vendors going to be members? Can we just assume that?
I think so. At least for sure, Prism Tech was part of it. So I'm very sure AdLink, now that it's AdLink, is part of it, which would like encompass OpenSplice and Cyclone. And Eprosima and RTI are definitely part of it.
Okay.
So at least these should be in it.
Does Eclipse have members on OMG?
Eclipse is written by AdLink. That's the port of OpenSpice to Eclipse license.
Oh yeah, I was just wondering, like Adelink does, but I wonder if some of the Eclipse maintainers maybe. But
I haven't followed closely who is actually maintaining, but I have the feeling that these are the same people.
Yeah. What I have noticed looking through this is that the spec is super light when it comes to logging, right? And honestly, if you look at RTI's docs, they're way more complete about what they publish with their logging implementation beyond what the spec. The spec just says it needs to support logging to what disk and a DDS topic, and that's kind of it.
there are code like or there's specific like error warning, fail, like all those fail codes, but they're super vague in their description. Like,
Yeah.
the thing.
So yeah, it's a
So,
good
so
point,
my
Miguel.
feeling,
We might be able to affect change there as we continue this. It's a good idea.
yeah, from things that happened in the past at least, RTI has been like the main entity driving the DDS spec overall, and often the spec like gets more precise as they go, as they figure out that like maybe being too vague is not enough for interoperability or things like that. And often because RTI has the most complete implementation, usually of all these DDS stuff, their stuff tends to make it in the spec just because it becomes the de facto standard. Not saying that that's going to be the case for the logging. Just that in general, it would be good to we could like just shoot an email to Gerardo or something just to have an idea if it's going the same direction. And maybe there
Yeah.
is
Well,
ways
and
to
even they've
prove
got
them
a
like that
forum,
with
right?
people.
Ruffin, I've seen some posts from you on their forum. They're pretty responsive there.
Yeah, they've got a community support forum that's it's pretty active, and you'll see Gerardo himself there sometimes.
Okay. Well, I think it sounds like we all agree that this is an interesting direction, and the mangling is important, and we have some good directions there. Although I need to flesh out our notes here before we publish anything. Um, does anyone else have anything they want to discuss on this topic? I appreciate all the pointers you gave me there, especially on the demangling.
Just an aside from the demangling, Mikhail mentioned that there's C++ functions. I'd just be wary that we want to make sure that we can keep the either the logging or the transform or the management kind of infrastructure independent of, in the sense that maybe you don't need ROS installed to either monitor this traffic or to generate the certificates, that kind of thing. I feel like it's nice to make the spec so there isn't like a single implementation that defines the spec, and then it's really hard. We get into the instance of like the client libraries of ROS1; they're just impossible to implement.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Cool. Okay. I think next up on our agenda is Mikhail and org repo management.
Yeah, so that's something I was actually hoping that we would have both maybe some Amazon folks and some OSRF folks on this call, which is going to make it harder at least to make decisions here, but at least we can discuss at the high level and see what our feeling is about it to then like communicate with them. So that's something we noticed and discussed with Rafin a little bit back when we didn't have any like security focused GitHub org unit and things like that, which was totally fine at the beginning because we're just developing everything on the ROS2 repo. Now that we're starting having like more tools, more ideas, more demos, we're thinking of maybe creating a specific org unit for that. So when we started
Way ahead of
working
you.
on,
Way ahead of you. Here, check this out.
Yeah,
So-
that's what I want to discuss. So
Yeah.
we have actually two. So we created with Amazon and Alias ROS-SWG for ROS Security Working Group
Mhm.
a while back, which the goal was to like put the Security Working Group repos in there. And in the end, we just put the stuff for our workshop, which is basically a few demos and a tool that Alias developed for like pen testing, mostly footprinting ROS systems. And so what I wanted to check is that then I discovered that this other ROS-security org unit, and I wanted to see if and I didn't see many security related repos in there.
No, I just
Which
started.
made
Yeah.
me wonder like is this an Amazon org unit that is mostly used for synchronizing Amazon work on ROS2 related things in general, or is this gonna be the end place where all the non-security thing will be moved out, and where we should move all the other, like the things that are in the other org unit, like here for security purposes?
So the idea with these, so Tomas and I we're talking to Tully. So Amazon is leading the tooling working group. We're leading the security working group, and we talked to Tully about creating a GitHub repo to both form a virtual team and actually work on, well, for us, right, security related projects as a team and actually have tasking as a team and stuff. And now that sort of happened as part of, as Amazon was handing the security working group over to us. And so they ended up adding some projects there that I'm not sure, as you're mentioning, I'm not sure they really belong there. I need to talk to Tomas about that a little bit more. But the end goal of this is exactly what you're saying. And we've actually started, we've got a draft up now. Here's a link to sort of how the working group takes on ownership and maintenance of new projects and that type of thing. And one of the things that I think really do make sense to have there is SROS2. Now, I don't know that is any of our calls. We need to talk to at least Jacob and Michael. And I think there's probably there might be some technical issues with actually changing where a project is that's in the build farm. Mikhail, you probably know way more about that than I do.
Yeah, there's in general it's just easier to not move things, but we can always like fix anything. Like it's just changing links here and there, like overall. And GitHub is pretty good with redirect if we forget any.
That's true.
Overall, nothing is unsolvable on that side. That's really cool. I'll have a look at that draft. I didn't know it existed.
Well, just because we just proposed it. Like I said, this is very new. But we are striving to get to exactly what you were talking about.
Okay, well that's perfect. So maybe then I should like maybe table my discussion because I'll have a look. Maybe we're gonna be duplicating a lot of discussion, and so I just wanted to bring up that like we had these two org units right now, and that also it's a bit unclear who approves versus who runs CI versus who merges stuff on SROS2, and I guess that's
yes, I agree.
part of the things.
Yes, that's a good idea. Go through the pull requests that I just pasted. We've got it added to the notes now as well, and leave any comments you have there. I think it outlines the approval, the review process fairly well. Hopefully it'll answer those questions, and obviously if you have any others, you can ask them there, or we can talk about it next month too, or in Matrix. I mean, whatever, right?
Yeah, you can you can reach out to Kyle or me directly too if you want to continue this discussion, so we don't have to wait a whole month. And, I think you've got our emails and we're on Discourse and all that jazz.
Okay, so sounds good. And just to loop the loop, I also chatted with Jacob and a few open robotics people at ROSCON that also said, yeah, sure, like the SROS2, like no one at Open Robotics is actually right now maintaining or implementing anything on it. And so they're totally fine with people from the working group actually taking over. And
I think that's perfect then. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for talking to them about that.
Awesome. Next up is you, Kyle, with your node discussion.
Right. All right. So last week we've been working for ages on this node IDL proposal, and we've been waiting to propose it while we kind of investigated the along the path of where we're hoping to go, making sure that the IDL we created actually made sense as far as where we were planning to use it, both from a security perspective and from some more general use cases that I think we all agree are really cool. I think so. What we proposed was just really the interface itself, along with a brief motivation section about how this came out of security and the use case in security, as well as some sort of more brief, outlines of other motivations, other things that are made possible by having such an IDL. Once that actually lands, we will also propose how we plan to use this from a security aspect. And we've been drafting these things in Google Docs. Ruffin, Jacob, Mikhail, I don't remember if you have access, but I'm happy to share access to whoever wants to work on these. We've got Google Docs for all of these. We can work on them together and then propose them once we're all happy. But we can also just talk about it on the pull request as well. I just wanted to mention that we proposed it and it's out there for review, whoever wants to talk about it. And if you've got any things you want to talk about now, that's fine too. Ruffin, did you want to talk about this?
Oh yeah, so this is something that I've been really hoping we get around to. It's going to be part of when we're working when I get back in January is incorporating information flow control into this, so where we add security labels to topics, and then we can sort of statically validate IFC on the computation graph. I wanted to ask on how far you think we could potentially take this, and if there are avenues that we can take to lighten our load. So what a particular example is, I see this as advantageous for quality of service, where we can annotate a topic by type, and that helps like a sanity check that two topics of a different type aren't going to connect. And then there's one step forward to like, oh, did the QoS settings match? There's already literature out there it's specifically in DDS, trying to statically analyze whether QoS terms match, and also dynamic terms, where like if you have nodes that are changing their QoS settings dynamically, whether two participants will continue to retain a connection and a match. Do you think there's ways of where we could have our IDL just more or less do a reference to an external QoS document? And that way that QoS document could be used at runtime for configuring, but it would also be used for the IDL description and like what this particular topic requires. So taking these kind of avenues of breaking out the description and components that are used at runtime, so that not everything is just loosey-goosey in terms of where things have the chance of getting out of sync, in terms that one's just a configuration file and one's just a description file, and they have nothing in between each other. That's sort of a weak enforcement.
Yeah. So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So we've got, as you mentioned, QoS is part of whether or not topics match up, and so I think they obviously make sense to be in the IDL in some form, right? And we've got that included in what we've designed so far. But what you're asking is instead of requiring that to be specified in the interface file as we've defined it, you want it to be able to reference some outside entity, like because obviously it needs to be specified in multiple places. But I'm not quite following you as to where that other place is. Is it in code, or is it some XML file?
Yeah, XML. Like currently, I think a lot of the DDS vendors have their own proprietary. Well, I think there's also a OMG effort to kind of make the configuration for QoS settings and XML sort of unified. You know, like RTI has their one format, fast RTPS. If they were all the same, I think that'd make it a lot easier for us. But before that occurs, I don't know, maybe we should think of, do we duplicate the QoS kind of description in our own IDL, or do we have some kind of tool that infers what the configuration is? And so maybe you can only do static analysis if all the QoS XML files you're referencing in your IDL are all the same RMW or DDS vendor. But yeah, the QoS options in the DDS are usually like external documents that are already
that's interesting. I haven't dealt with QoS a lot, so you're way more up to speed on this than I am. But what I have seen are the objects you create in Python or C++. I've not actually seen an XML file, so I'm a little out of my depth there. So what we were designing was mostly corresponding to the objects that are in code. But if I didn't actually realize that you could specify them outside in a standalone document. But honestly, we have that problem, the duplication, right, outside of QoS. And so I'd like to figure out a way to only have the interface written in one place long term, right? I don't know that we'll be able to swing that. Yeah, I obviously need to read this. Thank you. So I'm wondering if instead of trying to come up with a way to not duplicate QoS settings, we try to design a way to not duplicate the entire interface. Does that make sense, or is that way too way too ambitious?
That would be really awesome. It may be a bit tricky. Not to discourage you. I think like anything can be done with enough time and pain.
Well, I mean, even short term, I think consistency is important. If we try to solve this problem just for QoS, then I feel like it will be sort of confusing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I didn't like. I just stopped traveling today, actually, so I'm gonna go back to read your PR as well that I've been following from very far away. One thing that seemed like tricky is, yeah, like this idea of this duplication, and also how do you actually proper do like overrides? Because it seems that like QoS or things like that are really like integrator application dependent. And so if someone provides me QoS in their Node.el of their node, if this bakes in QoS, it gets more complex to reuse because I may not be
You're
willing to
absolutely
use the
right.
QoS they provide.
Yeah, although I'm trying to
And
put
so
myself
this
in
thing,
I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of an upstream developer. Like, why would I ever actually specify a QoS? Because you're right, that's something that the end user typically would
yeah,
specify, right?
actually, we have a similar discussion on there is a
It
ROS
could be like they have a sensor driver, or that it needs to be just best effort, like it's, or they have an algorithm that's requiring sensor information that is best effort. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, basically that's exactly in the line of what I was pointing at, is that we currently have some people from the navigation stack that wanted to submit a rep specifying how sensor drivers and sensor data used in navigation should be specified, which QoS they should be using. And we actually like started this exact discussion, which is like, well, like I don't want a sensor driver to actually hard code like a specific QoS setting, because in the end, like I may want to use another one for my specific application. And in the case of sensors, most of the time we would expect that well, best effort is what you would use for any high bandwidth sensor. But then if you're talking like, I don't know, a cliff sensor for a vacuum cleaner, well, in that case, it's not very high bandwidth and you definitely don't want to miss a message. So there are many applications where like QoS for sensors or the data types like would need to be tweaked based on how you want to use them. And that's where being able to configure them at runtime is very important. And it's a bit hard to decide like anywhere else to specify it except at the end user configuration time.
Well, to
Obviously,
clarify, is it actually runtime or is it launch time? You know what I mean? Like when you're creating your launch system, that's when you specify what QoS you want, and it may differ from what is specified in the upstream IDL.
yeah. So I think that would be the goal. Like the ideal could provide something, but it should be easy to override at launch
Yes,
time.
agreed. Okay.
And that's exactly what uh, in the case of DDS, which is another dimension I would like to talk about. But like in the case of DDS, they have these XML like specifications that you can actually give, which allow you to specify, and that will override QoS data for created participants, which allow you at without changing code or without recompiling to actually like configure your system at launch time. But then another thing is that I'm a bit worried about putting QoS in how to define a node, and it's just going back and forth with this overall ROS2 should be abstract thing, which is what QoS makes sense at a high level if someone is using a non-DDS RMW implementation.
Yeah. Yeah, that
In
is the
that case,
perpetual problem, isn't it?
does keep last make sense, or like how do we map to something different? And don't have a good solution for that either. I just don't know if that's been like. It seems that the PR was very DDS specific, with DDS in mind, and I was just wondering if that's been taken into account when thinking
No,
about this
you're
one.
talking about the Node IDL PR specifically. It,
Yeah,
yeah, no, it's super DDS specific. And you're right. Uh, that's hard. That's really all I got to say about that.
that's that's totally okay. Like I mean, like I've been every time I'm developing a tool which is not like at a very specific, well-defined layer in the stack, the abstraction question comes and bite us.
Mhm.
And that was for the demangler as well. Like, okay, we need SROS to be aware of demangling without knowing exactly where it happens in the stack. And so we're just going to duplicate that information in a separate part. And
Yeah,
it's always a hard question because I hate duplication, but on the other hand, sometimes you don't want to introduce coupling. And so it's always a tricky question.
I think that's a good point. I think with while I say that the IDL is is specific to DDS, really what I'm saying is when we wrote it, all we were thinking about was DDS. But if I actually think about it, the only things that are in there are at a ROS level of abstraction because ROS exposes the QoS settings as well. Um, and so I think if we can stick to the abilities that are exposed in the ROS APIs, we're fairly safe. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think that's good. Like, and that's why I saw there was more DDS at the ROS level now, more QoS settings, sorry, at at the ROS level. And so I think like mimicking that is fine. And
Okay,
worst case scenario, if it's specified for a system that doesn't provide them or doesn't use them, well, it would just not use them. And I think that's fine.
agreed.
And so for the specific case of QoS, I think it can work out pretty well with the current state of the ROS API. And I just wanted this to be like in our mind when we start thinking about overall overrides and overall configuration space from this no DL file.
Yeah, that's a great point. Definitely something we need to keep in mind because it is something that as you well know, is the entire reason ROS2 was structured the way it was with the middlewares, right? Or the middle RMW layer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you for saying that.
Anything else we need to chat about in this call? Well, on that note, everybody have a great rest of year, and we will talk to you in January if we don't talk to you sooner. Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.